Good afternoon, dear Jan Baetens. Welcome to the Faculty of Filosofía y Letras de la Universidad de Granada. You are here as part of the research staff of Nar-Trans, our research project on transmedia narratives and crowdsourcing, creative collaborative creation. And we are having the opportunity to talk very briefly with Jan about a series of topics. I would like to invite you to get rid of the mask. We are vaccinated. We are holding the security distance. The hall is ventilated, so I think we cope with the security messages. I would like to start talking have a fast flash or summary about the core importance of media studies and the concept of media, and particularly on the concept of intermediality at the moment we are now witnessing in terms of comparative studies, literature and cultural studies.
Yes, thank you first of all for having me once again in this wonderful environment of the Granada department. Well, actually the notion of intermediality, which we, let's say, were among the first to defend, not just in Spain, but perhaps even worldwide, is both for you and for me, as well as for me, really the key issue, the key topic, not just of literary studies, which is our common background, but let's say the broader field of media studies and cultural studies, which has become our field today. And as I see it, and I have the pleasure to stress that it's also the way we see it. Intermediality, well, is let's say, if it is a key concept, it is not only because everything today has become hybridized, which, let's say, is very difficult to let's say, not to see that larger evolution. But I would like to take a step back and to stress also the key importance of the notion of mediality. There are no cultural objects which are not mediatized. That mediatization is not only, let's say, a material thing, that would be the semiotic side of mediality. It is also a very strongly historicized, contextualized concept, hence the importance of, let's say, communication studies in the very broad sense of the word. And every medium, and I think that there is a growing consensus on that as well, can only be studied today from the perspective of intermediality, meaning that in every medium, whatever medium we may be discussing, there is inevitably a kind of, let's say, either convergent or divergent encounter between different medial perspectives, but each medium is also something that is systematically adapted into other media, and that process of adaptation, which can no longer be dissociated from that internal intermediality, is something we try to think under the umbrella term of transmediality. Although we are very well aware of the fact that these two concepts, intermediality, transmediality, have not yet, let's say, found their final definition, and we don't need that final definition to continue to work with it. But to summarize, any cultural object whatsoever is a medial concept. Any medium is by definition a kind of intermedium, and in the world in which we are living today, there are no longer, let's say, real boundaries between these different fields. Hence the fundamental idea that from the very moment you start studying or practicing something, you are already approaching, let's say, the marvelous world of transmediality and transmedialization.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot for bringing up the reflection on the concept of transmedialization, which was the initial gear of our common work. And now I would like to hear your last idea or opinion about the qualities of the necessary research field that we have tried to build up here in Nar-Trans, bringing people from audiovisual communication studies, from even journalist studies, people working on visual studies, and then researchers coming from the field of literary, cultural, theater and drama studies. This is also natural for us, but it looks like academia, research funding programs, etc., still are reluctant to comprehend the benefits of this space. What's your feeling about it at this moment?
Well, I absolutely share both, let's say, your fundamental enthusiasm for that kind of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary collaboration. And on the other hand, I also share, unfortunately, your impression that institutionally speaking, that kind of efforts are insufficiently funded, that goes without saying, but also insufficiently supported. There is a lot of reluctance everywhere, not only in departments that, let's say, are facing a difficult future like literature, unfortunately, but even in, let's say, departments and environments which seem to have a much brighter future, like communication studies. I think that let's say, hesitation, reluctance has a lot of things to do with a quite old-fashioned idea of what interdisciplinarity actually means. In the, let's say, classic old-fashioned way of thinking of interdisciplinarity, one had either, let's say, a kind of utopian version of that kind of approach in which one was supposed to have a complete mastery of all the different fields that were gathered. That is, of course, not, we are not superhuman beings. We should accept certain limitations in our own case, but also in the case of those eager to collaborate with us. So that's one traditional, let's say, misconception on interdisciplinarity. The other misconception, and I think it's even more dangerous, has to do with the fact that interdisciplinarity tended to be reduced to, let's say, the sharing of just an object with, let's say, no real willingness to share also methodologies and theories. I think that what Nar-Trans has been doing since 7 years, officially speaking, and the group already started to work before, is, let's say, to try a kind of third way in which we try, or in which Nar-Trans try to go beyond, let's say, the mere sharing of an object, for instance, a movie, studied from different point of views, and which tries also to accept its own limitations. Nar-Trans is, for me, an example of collective intelligence. And collective intelligence does not mean that all members of the community have the same knowledge about everything. No, it's a kind of really, everybody puts something in a big basket and then you shake it in a creative way, and you have to be confident that what will be produced, and the examples of collective intelligence prove that one can, let's say, trust that final result. One should believe from the very beginning that the outcome will produce something more than the simple, let's say, addition, juxtaposition of the specific expertise and competence of all members. And once again, Nar-Trans proves that, let's say, it's a kind of collective intelligence in action, to quote Bruno Latour.
I love this quotation because it gives us also a bridge for the next question. That would be to to point out as an example of not only of our collaboration, but also of a shared concept about the need of putting theory into motion and relating theory and creation in a sort of loophole, which would show the growing need to show to the student, to show to young researchers that part of the job it's really trying to create. You are a poet yourself, you have a long career in writing poetry, but also in producing intermedial text and books, installation, exhibitions. I would like you to tell us very briefly about this idea, also on the basis of Frankenstein 1973-2020, El espíritu de la colmena, that we've been so lucky, or I've been so lucky to co-authorize with you.
Yeah, so this is really a kind of one of the possible outcomes and practical outcomes of the Nar-Trans collective intelligence. But first of all, I would like to stress the fact that that interaction between, let's call it theory, and let's call it practice, which may, let's say, be one of the possible avenues of our profession and our professional activities in the near future, is not something that is new at all. Actually, what that interaction, that permanent feedback, that loophole between theory and practice is doing, is actually nothing more than going back to what, let's say, the scholars of the Renaissance and 16th and 17th century were actually doing. So we are simply, let's say, reinventing a kind of past, based upon the convergence, creative convergence of different competences and fields of interest, which has been lost by, let's say, the increasing specialization, let's say, which emerged throughout the 19th century and which has been institutionalized, and it still is in our universities as we know them today. But we all know and we all see that things are changing. Things are changing in our field because the boundaries between art schools and theoretical programs are quite rapidly vanishing. It's the case in Spain, it's the case in Belgium, and I think that Nar-Trans as well is a perfect example of what might be invented and produced within this context. Of course, when we say that theory and practice have to be reconciled, that reconciliation, that gathering of these competences does of course not mean that we have to start from scratch. We have to use our already existing expertises and interests, literature, cinema, but also book history, intermediality studies, and so on and so forth. And then once, let's say, we accept to get started, we have to, let's say, have the courage to continue and to really come up with concrete, specific projects, which can be both, let's say, theoretically ambitious, but practically realizable, doable, like in the case of this, actually I don't know how to call it. It's not just a collection of poetry, it's also a sample, an example of mutual self-translation, since it's a bilingual work and there is no original version completed by a translation. No, both versions have, let's say, emerged more or less simultaneously, and there has been a permanent feedback between both versions, more or less like we discussed it a couple of days ago as well, like for instance the poetic practice of that Catalan poet Joan Margaret, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, since my knowledge of Catalan is unfortunately close to non-existing, but he explains very well that he does not write simply a text in Catalan and then makes a translation. No, he uses, let's say, the practice, and this is also a theory of translation, in order to rewrite his own work. And we have done the same, not just by rewriting our texts in different languages, but also by rewriting a wonderful movie. El Espíritu de la Colmena, itself a very intermedial work in which, let's say, text, image, sound, history come back in a very creative way. And it was the ideal starting point to, let's say, to show, to demonstrate how one can, both from a practical and a theoretical point of view, transmedialize an already strongly intermedial work. I'm very proud of the result. I'm very grateful to the editorial of the University of Granada for the material realization, since we have both a strong interest also in the digitization of culture. The digitization of culture does not imply that the book as a material object will appear. No, the book will change. The book will become hybridized, and I would be very happy if, let's say, this small sample of collective work, starting from an also collective work, which was the Erice's movie, I would be very happy if, let's say, later on, this could be, or something else, something similar, could be further transmedialized in even more hybrid and let's say, more explicitly intermedial ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first, it's very interesting what you have said. Maybe for the clarification of the viewers of this video, it is interesting to say that the book, the edition of the book, besides the bilingual poems in French and Spanish, it's collecting a number of photograms selected from the movie. These photograms do not work as illustrations, or the text of the poems explains at all what the images are supposed to mean. But on the other hand, we looked for different kind of connections, intermediations, frictions, as indirect suggestions, in order to work this sort of intermediality that the book allows us. No? So to end up this brief talk, I would like to close in Spanish, if you don't mind, because we love multilingualism. And
yes.
We're happy and very, very fortunate that Jan speaks many languages. Y simplemente quería despedirte, sabiendo un poco más sobre cómo percibes el futuro de este tipo de proyectos, cuáles pueden ser las líneas que nos permitan continuar en esta dirección, aunque no siempre es fácil, como antes decíamos, y cuáles son tus deseos, ¿no? de que este espacio que ha significado Nar-Trans en Granada pueda continuar.
Veo dificultades y veo también muchísimas perspectivas. La dificultad puede ser o parecer un poco paradójica, en el sentido que la manera en que Nar-Trans elabora la noción de multilingüismo me parece, insuficientemente corajosa, porque se reduce en práctica a dos lenguajes, dos lenguas, dos idiomas, el español y el inglés. Sería muy, creo que para por venir de Nar-Trans será capital de abrirse a otros idiomas ibéricos y internacionales. Por ejemplo, en francés, pero no necesariamente. Creo que aquí en España existe una situación con todas las lenguas dichas regionales, pero que son mucho más que regionales, hay verdaderamente la posibilidad de construir un laboratorio verdaderamente multilingüe. Multilingüismo no es lengua nacional más inglés. Creo que es una situación muy peligrosa y peligrosa también porque permite, por ejemplo, atraer colegas anglófonos, pero que solo hablan inglés. Lo que me parece, no tengo nada en contra, por supuesto, pero me parece...
limitado.
Sí, es una lástima. Para Nar-Trans, pero también para ellos mismos, y tendrían que darse cuenta que la globalización no significa imperialismo de una sola lengua. Eso me parece una dificultad para, digamos, yo veo el futuro de Nar-Trans en una perspectiva muy internacional y hay más que el inglés. Pero las perspectivas al lado de esta dificultad me parecen claras y muy prometedores porque Nar-Trans ya es este laboratorio de trabajo transmedial que se lo quiera o no, será necesariamente el porvenir de todo lo que hacemos dentro de una facultad de letras. Y aquí también no debería ser considerado como algo muy nuevo. Son cosas que, digamos, las ciertas generaciones anteriores ya hicieron. Y debería ser nuestra ambición de reinventar, de continuar esta tradición que ya no ve ninguna diferencia entre el trabajo multilingüe y el trabajo transmedial.
Qué interesante. Muchísimas gracias, Jan. Merci bien.
Gracias a ti, merci bien a toi, y merci à Grenade.